Hi everybody, welcome back for another video. Today I'm going to talk about the SHTF situation and what does that mean. I guess for everybody it's a very different definition, and if you're using less lethals or you're using lethal weapons, it's probably also a very different definition. But one thing that I think we can all agree on is loss of power, loss of electricity or our power grid is definitely a situation where I think most people would categorize that as an SHTF situation, because over time, as the time goes on, that becomes more problematic and more problematic. People get desperate. If you are relying on less lethals for your primary home defense and you are using tanks, HPA tanks, I have a recommendation. I recommend that you use the 3,000 PSI tanks like I have here on my stock VKS. And the reason why I recommend that is because you can use a hand pump. And so think about this. If you have a 4,500 PSI tank on here, you're not able to do that by hand. And so if you rely on compressors, you rely on going to a paintball shop, or you do it yourself because you have a compressor that you have plugged into the outlet, that thing is going to no longer work. So unless you have a bunch of tanks already filled on the shelf waiting to be used. So again, we're talking about SHTF. These are situations where anything goes. And so if you truly want to follow that, and you want to strictly think about that, you should not be bound to electricity, because losing electricity is probably one of the biggest things that disrupts our lives right now. Out of everything that you can think of, as bad as a lot of things are, that is the one where it completely disrupts everything that we do. So I love the hand pump. First of all, these are cheap. I view it as disposable, although you can certainly take them apart and you can use the parts, and you can change your filters, and you can change parts that come with it. And for 70 bucks, you can have one of these, and you can keep your HPA tank filled on a regular basis. And it just requires a little bit of pumping power. You have to put some effort into it. You have to use a little muscle. And as long as you keep this thing lubed, and I usually use these gun drops, which I actually find I just put a few drops on the shaft here before I use it, and then go up and down about 10-15 times just to get it thoroughly warmed up. And then to fill a tank like this, a 3,000 PSI tank from zero, 200 pumps maybe take you 20 minutes, 30 minutes if you want to really take a break here and there and let the shaft cool down. But I usually let it run down to about 1,000 PSI, and when it gets there, I will then fill it up. And if you do that, if you don't let it go below 1,000, and you do the pumping, maybe 100 pumps, maybe 10-15 minutes, you can have it filled up. And that's going very slow, taking your time. This is not like up and down, up and down. You should have a pause. You should go up at the top, and you should hold for 1 second. And when you come down, there should be a hold for like a second or two. And I think each time at the top and the bottom of your stroke, you should give it a second, because I think that's going to maximize the amount of air you get in. And you definitely don't want to be pumping up and down, up and down. It's good for you. It's good for your marker. And if the power is off, you have the air that you need. If you're out in your vehicle and you're out somewhere rural and you don't have electricity, this is the thing to do. You can throw it in your car, you can take your VKS, you can shoot, you can fill, you can have more than one tank, you can have one person pumping up tanks while one person is using their VKS. Again, these are scenarios that I have a hard time truly getting into the prepper mindset. I agree with a lot of the philosophy. How likely it is that certain things will happen, I don't know. But the chances of losing electricity are high. Here where I live, every time we have a thunderstorm with heavy wind, we have so many huge pine trees. The chances of a single pine tree falling within 2 square miles of where I am is actually quite high, and the chances of it falling over electric lines that are going up above ground is actually quite high. So it's actually a couple times a year we lose power here, and we're basically living in a pine forest here in the Atlanta metro area. So when I'm here, I know that power is an issue, but we've got a lot of safety concerns, national safety concerns in America regarding our power grid, and it's not always underground. When I'm in Florida, all our power lines are underground. We have hurricanes, but still we have concerns about the grid. And so I don't want to be relying on this as my primary means of self-defense, which many people do. I don't want to be relying on this and not have a source of power. So one of these is mandatory. Even if you have a compressor, you've got to have one of these. And I argue, if you're frugal and you don't want to spend the money and you don't want to deal with the hassle of a compressor, just use one of these. Use it. I've had this thing for the entire life of the VKS, so that's over a year and a half now. I haven't had any troubles with this. I use it very carefully. I warm it up, I lube it, and I haven't had any troubles filling my VKS tanks. Again, where you need to think about this though is when you're buying your tanks. It is very tempting, and I've thought about it many times, and I look at those hero tanks from First Strike, and they have 4,500 PSI, and in a very similar size, you can get more shots. And that's very attractive, and that might be great to have one of those and keep it on here as your primary. But I would definitely not suggest that you only have that. I think you should have some 3,000 PSI tanks on hand for the pump, for the hand pump, as a backup in case of emergency.
So by the nature of using these, you have to realize that these are by definition going to be cheaper and not as durable. And so even though they do recommend 4,500 PSI as the max pressure, and they are probably physically capable of doing that, I don't know that if in an emergency situation you really want to rely on that. The specs on these may not live up to that. Again, it's a similar analogy to what I've made before about air guns in general. They may be capable of a certain level of max power, but if you want to go 20% below that, you're probably going to get the best lifespan, the best reliability, the best performance. Same thing with these pumps. These things are pneumatic systems with O-rings. They're going to wear and tear. If you're using this at 4,500, you're pushing the lifespan of this, and you're also pushing the specs. And so they may not do well for you in that situation, especially if you're hooking this up to a bottle that's already got over 3,000 PSI in it. The pressure in the system may not be great for it during the time that you're doing that pumping up to 4,500. I would never say it's impossible, but I'm saying if you want the best life and you want the most reliability from this when you do need it, from my experience, I pump it up to 3,000. So that's 3,000, even though it could go up to 4,500. And so by doing that, I just use 3,000 PSI tanks because they're so much cheaper. And so for the price of one 4,500 PSI tank, you could have 2 or 3 of the 3,000 PSI tanks. And so these are considerations. It's not trivial. And so if you use it in perfect conditions, the perfect way as I've described, you'll get the best life and the reliability out of this. And this is the one that I used for Uncle's, but there's many of these Chinese brands in Amazon. I would say they're all very similar, but this is the one that I'm using.
So again, that's just my small words of advice here about SHTF situation. Now, other folks are going to say, well, that's not real SHTF situation if you just have a power outage, because you shouldn't be dependent on this. But that's a reality. This is a very capable self-defense tool, and if you're using it, you want to be able to try to think ahead, think about the best ways to use it, the best scenarios where you can keep it running when you really need it. Now, stopping in the middle of a very acute situation and pumping is impractical, and so that's why you need backup tanks. if you're using this and you don't have other options. But I think many people have multiple launchers, and so that's also wise, where you can go from one to the other. But the pumping would be something you do offline when there is no imminent threat, and you do this because it adds to your workload of whatever else things you need to be doing in that type of situation. But I think it's more than worth the effort. And when you're not in those situations, the pumping, doing this, the exercise that you get from that is well worth the effort. And if you're trying to save money and you don't want to invest in expensive tanks and you don't want to invest in expensive compressors and really go all in full into this less lethal, and you want to just have a less lethal, you want to have it available, you want to be able to fill it, but you're not all in enough that you need to be filling multiple launchers day after day after day, then this is just so much simpler of a way to do it. So that's my word for today. I hope you appreciate the point of view that I'm trying to bring, and everybody just do your best, and hope this was helpful for you, and we'll see you in the next one.